Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Kathy Flaherty at Matthews Carter & Boyce. Our full-service accounting firm has been a pillar of the Northern Virginia community, and we are currently celebrating our 75th anniversary. Thank you for joining us today. We have been hosting our Women in Business event for several years and have presented on a variety of timely topics. We're excited about today's event and topic of living your next level life, both in your career and your personal life. We look forward to a great presentation from our two panelists today. First, though, a couple of logistics. The presentation will be a conversation format where we will ask panelists a series of questions. We have allotted time at the end of the seminar for the questions from the audience. Please submit your questions via the chat feature, and we will continue the conversations with Kathy and Chris while we ask your questions. Before we pass it over to our featured panelists, I want to welcome Ellen and Flex Professionals, who is a co-sponsor for our Women in Business series. Ellen?
Thank you, Kathy. Hello again, my name is Ellen Grealish. I am one of the partners and founders of Flex Professionals. For those of you who have not heard of us, we are a recruiting and staffing firm that specializes specifically in part-time and full-time flexible and project-based placements. One of our key differentiators is really our talent pool of about 18,000 incredible people. Mostly we work with a lot of women and moms who maybe after a professional career took some time off and now are looking to re-enter the workforce in a flexible way. We also work with a lot of women and men who are ready to maybe scale back from their 40, 50-hour work week, or are looking for more flexibility in their current environment or in their jobs. So on the flip side, we are a great source of talent for small businesses that want to grow, but may not have the budget to attract top talent, or just may not have the work yet to justify a full-time position, but really want somebody talented, experienced, mature, and dedicated to their business. We're also a great source of talent for larger companies that are looking for more gender diversity in their workforce. And I will say, we work a lot with the hybrid, remote, flexible work. Those were terms that were not very common 13 years ago. I know COVID has made those very common terms now, but we really are experts in this kind of flexible staffing since we've been doing it for over 13, 14 years, and we know what kind of works, what doesn't, and love to help businesses incorporate that kind of work culture into their organization. And it is very important we vet not just our candidates and our job seekers, but our clients to make sure that they truly are supportive of a flexible work culture. And that is why we love working with one of our favorite clients, MCB. I just want to give a shout out and say thank you very much for this opportunity and for always spending so much time and effort on these Women in Business series, and Flex Professionals is truly honored to be part of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. So my name is Ravan Soa, and I am a senior manager with Matthews Carter & Boyce, and I will be moderating the questions for our featured panelists. So before we start with our questions, I'd like for Coach Kathy and then Chris to introduce themselves.
I'll start. You want to start, Chris? Excellent. All right. So, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Kathy Wilson, founder of Coach Kathy Wilson. And I literally work with women who are in transition, who want to pivot and take their lives to the next level, who have gotten or experienced a certain amount of success in their lives, and they're kind of looking around going, all right, I no longer have the same responsibilities. I've created the success, but what do I want next for my life? And what does that look like? And how do I get there? My background I've had about 20 years of coaching women executives, and I still do coach women executive clients, and really helping them to hone in and I think reevaluate their leadership styles based on where they are now versus what everybody's telling them this is how leadership looks like. But like, who am I authentically, and how do I show up like that in my environment? So This topic was especially interesting to me because it combined the two things that I love most and the things that I do every day in my business, which is helping women take their lives, their businesses, their personal lives to the next level, but also doing it authentically and looking at it through the lens of women who have been leaders in organizations. So it's exciting for me. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Kathy. I can go next. So I'm Chris Smith. I'm the founder and managing principal from ChangeSmith. We are an organizational health company. We support our client needs related to change, culture, leadership. We do that in, as we say, 5 different modalities: consulting, coaching, team coaching, facilitation, and training. And what we ultimately try to do is to help leaders to enable a more remarkable experience for people. We find that people who are enjoying things, who are finding joy in the work that they do, tend to perform at higher levels and more sustainably. So we prioritize the people experience, and we're sort of betting on a prioritization of people leading to better business goals. So why was this? Why was it important, and why was I excited about being able to participate today? So my leadership philosophy, to be fair, I don't know that for the first maybe 18 years of my career that I really thought too much about it. I just sort of took it for granted. At the same time, I had been a youth soccer coach. So I coached kind of elite level, usually younger, 10, 11-year-old girls. I've been coaching now for 20 years in Arlington. And it's funny that these 10 and 11-year-old girls, which at various times included my own daughters, really sort of became my muse for leadership, right? And what I mean by that is to say, I find that there are 2 kinds of coaches out there, at least in terms of sports, right? There are the coaches that prioritize the results and the outcomes, and then there are coaches that prioritize the players. Right. And it's just a fundamentally different experience when you're choosing to prioritize one over the other. So some of the things that we do with our players is we're really trying to create these conditions so that they can learn about, collaboration, self-advocacy, willingness to fight even, and really about leadership. And so as I moved forward and sort of came up with the ideas for what ChangeSmith would be, I knew that it was going to be focused on a leadership that would really help to open the door for not just the girls that I was coaching, but really thinking it was this challenge that I thought, we're teaching these girls to be able to do these things, and yet we're bringing them into a system that maybe doesn't give them the same amount of space as it might for others. And so that really became a driving factor for me. I really love what Coach Kathy said about seeing people, helping people to, and women in particular, to understand who they are authentically and how they show up in the environment. And I guess my piece to that might be helping leaders to really create that space in the environment and prioritize people being able to step into that space, in that authentic way.
Yeah. I want to add, Chris, I love it that you came out of sports, because I don't know if you know anything about me. I did as well. I played college and professional basketball, and then my daughter's playing college volleyball at Virginia Tech. So I completely agree with you when you talk about, those traits that help those young girls really grow into leaders, but it doesn't transition as well sometimes because that's not how we're set up, right? So yeah, I love that.
Very cool.
Great. So we will start our discussion with the first question for Coach Kathy. Coach Kathy, do you have any tips to identify the roadblocks that are standing in the way of progress for you professionally and personally?
So I think I've been thinking about that question, and I think I want to answer that in 2 parts. So there are the external roadblocks that we see, which I think are these societal norms, the constructs within which women have to operate and leaders have to operate. But I'm going to focus on women in particular. There's this struggle, and you will never see, and I don't know that you can name one movie or TV show where a woman has been able to be a successful leader, right? Very successful, but she also has a good relationship. Her children are happy and respectful. She has great friends. There's always this sort of push and pull with you have to choose one or the other. You're either going to choose to be extremely successful and aspire in your career, or you're going to be somebody who's a good mother and a good partner and be able to really participate in your life. And so even though we don't understand how those things actually impact us, we are subconsciously conditioned by this. And so sometimes the desire to succeed, the roadblock is, but if I succeed, I'm going to have to give all of these things up. And we don't have any other formulas that allow us to say, I can succeed, but still have a prioritize these things that are important. And what does that look like? And leadership, our society, our organizations are not even set up in order to nurture that process, but it is possible. So there's these external roadblocks, as though, what is it that I can actually achieve without having to give up those things that are important to me? Then there are the internal roadblocks, which is our limiting beliefs, which come from that conditioning, which we believe that because that story's been told so many times. And so it's difficult for us to sometimes even, I don't want to say get out of our own way, but to truly believe that we can really aspire, achieve in organizations and progress professionally and personally, and be fulfilled and have it feel good for us in both of those areas. So, through my coaching, and I think Chris will probably be able to speak a little bit more on that, if we don't address the external battle and the internal battle, it's very difficult to help women progress, right? We're always just like, breaking the glass ceiling. But, internally, I've got all this conditioning that's telling me that I'm going to have to give up so much, or that other women are, there's a small piece of pie and we're all fighting for it. So we have to address both of those, because those are the roadblocks that I see. They're internal and external. We can't just address one.
Great. The next question is for Chris. How can we contribute to a healthier, more positive culture in our workplace?
Yeah, so I think traditional leadership, right, has really been in the service of business, right? More profit, more market share. And that includes a bias for making the, sort of the application of that leadership model easier for the leaders, right? There's tons of examples of people in leadership positions working with individual contributors or people who are maybe not quite as senior, saying, hey, can we just do this for the team, right? Can we just do this for the company? Let's get through this quarter, and then whatever you need personally, we can work that out later, right? And I think most of the leaders who have been served by that bias have been men, right? And I'll state the obvious, right? I'm a man, right? So it's hard for me to, without even the obvious eloquence of what Coach Kathy is sharing here, I can't share a woman's perspective. But what I can do is try to make the system different, even in the slightest bit. And so when I talk about healthy leadership is meant to be in the service of people. Right, it's biased towards the provision of conditions, and those conditions are gender agnostic. Right, it's not saying, oh well, we'll do these things for men, we'll do these things for women. When it's practiced right, it's meant to create opportunities for whomever is deserving of those opportunities, based on how those actual participants got together and said, hey, we want to do things this way, we want to be this way, we want to have these behaviors that characterize not only the experience that we're having, but the experience that we're enabling for our customers, our partners, whomever. And so I think the more leaders that I can help to educate in that way, the better opportunities are maybe created for everybody, including women.
Yeah. Can I add something to that? And just kind of, I love that you said that, Chris, because when I was coaching basketball, I was in women's basketball, and then we had our men's basketball was right next door. And my head coach called me in one day, and he said, because I was a recruiting coordinator, which is the top assistant. He said, Steve, who's the top assistant, he's on the road all the time, looking for kids and doing this and doing that. And I looked at him and I said, that's great, but Steve has a me. at home who's making sure that the kids are taken care of and the groceries are bought. Because my husband was also working full time and I had a toddler. And I said, you know, Steve has a me. So I'm actually doing both jobs. I'm doing me and I'm doing Steve, right? And so when you talk about how it's sort of biased towards men, you know, in your work, that's why it's so important, because not a lot of people recognize that. And I still find that today, that it's not recognized, that it's not the same, right? That environment is not conducive to women being able to make some of the same choices that men can make. And then it often feels like we have to sacrifice that ability to rise in the organization because of that. There's a quote out there attributed to Machiavelli, I believe, and it's something about like, there's nothing that's harder to do than to bring about a new order of things, right? And so people just don't take the time to look and say, why are things the way that they are, right? And so I feel like I'm almost like, you know, pushing that boulder up the hill to say, you know, hey, I think leadership can be done differently. And the people that upon whom my business depends are these people who are already in leadership positions. Yes. So I'm asking them to make compromises to some degree, to say, look, this may not be, you know, the best outcome for you, but it's a better, broader outcome that should mean something more. And ultimately, I think if it's done properly, it's gonna lead to better business outcomes. But it's for the right reasons, you know. Yeah, I agree. Like when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusivity, you know, that inclusivity piece includes gender inclusivity. And how does that environment conducive to gender equity and opportunities and being able to have access to those opportunities? Yeah.
So I have a question for both of you, and we'll start off with Coach Kathy, but what does it mean to be healthy?
Are you asking like from a healthy, like a personal perspective or an organizational perspective, or both?
Both.
Yeah, so I'll do personally, Chris, if that's okay, and then feel free to chime in. Please. But for me, to be healthy is to be able to wake up every day. Now, I'm just going to talk about it in general sense versus like working out and taking vitamins and all that kind of stuff. But to me, to feel healthy going to work means that I don't wake up with dread about having to go to the office and pretend to be something that I'm not, because that is the only way that I can pursue an opportunity. I'm working with a client now, and she's a pretty high up executive in a company, and she's been successful, but we're still working on authentic leadership. She says, I had to present to my board, and every time I go in there, I feel so nervous because I feel like they're all judging me and I feel so small. And, you know, I'm having to reframe this, like, look at everything that you have accomplished. Your whole story is a story of triumph. Nobody gave you this, you earned this. And she's still having a difficult time feeling that. Now, I'm not saying that we're never going to ever experience imposter syndrome, or we're never ever going to feel like how did I get here? Yes, and I say that imposter syndrome. It's not like we're never going to experience it, but is there anything else we can call on that allows us to say, no, I earned this and I'm here, and people need to hear my voice. And if I don't lend my voice to this opportunity, then this organization is not going to be as good as it can be, because I'm a part of this and I'm a part of creating it. So to be healthy is to be able to step into that feeling whole and feeling valued and feeling as though you matter and that you are seen, and that the environment is conducive to that. And that's what I'll turn it over to Chris. But we feel so unhealthy going to work. We feel like we're only taking part of ourselves. We're holding back our voices, our opinions, our thoughts, and our ideas, because we don't think that they're as valued. And that is not healthy. And that actually leads to a lot of personal health issues, stress, these autoimmune diseases that pop up. We don't even realize how much stress just breaks down our bodies. So, I mean, I think there is a correlation, but that's another topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kathy's 100% locked in right there. It's a lot about feeling, right? And what might be healthy for one person might be different for somebody else, right? So it's, you know, I keep using this term, sort of conditions and creating conditions, right? I mean, I think when a leader or a leadership team has created healthy conditions. People have an honest sort of experience into which they can step, right? They know that they can say something without being made to feel bad about it. They can have ambitions without being made to feel that they are competing in an unhealthy or a negative way. They can understand what happens if a mistake's made, right? When I mentioned I'm a soccer coach, I'm coaching very young kids. We love mistakes.
Oh, yes.
Right? Like we have this whole philosophy where we talk about, look, there's nobody who just magically is amazing at some skill set, right? We stink first, right? And then we get a little bit good, and then we get better, and then we have the opportunity to become great. But, stink is not a 4-letter word amongst my players. We kind of joke about it, like, oh, we stink at that. Okay, well, yeah, we just tried to learn that last training session, and now we're getting better. But if I go a little bit more sort of textbook on a healthy definition, right? For me, healthy is a combination between cohesiveness and clarity, right? And cohesiveness really applies to the leadership team. And it's about a trust, it's about a commitment, it's about shared goals and purpose and being all on the same page, right? And the sort of the best example I can give is, we've all either experienced or seen stories. We've been the child, maybe we've been the parent, but kids are always in a position to get into trouble when mom and dad don't agree on something, and the kids know that, and they go to one or the other to try to get away with something. Yeah. Right. So when that mom and dad or that leadership team are on the same page, then the rest of the organization knows, okay, this is the direction. Whether I ask Kathy or I ask Chris or I ask Ellen, whomever I ask, I know I'm going to get the same direction. And that creates healthy conditions. And then the other piece is around the clarity, and the clarity applies to the entire organization. And that's really about who are we, right? What is it that we do? Like specifically, what is it that we do, right? How do we behave? What's the most important thing that we're doing right now? Maybe most important, why is it that we do what we do, right? You can think of any number of organizations that on paper look like they're competitors, they're the same, right? Maybe it's Coke and Pepsi, or it's American Airlines and Southwest Airlines, but why they actually do what they do can be fundamentally different, and it has so many different permutations. So for me, healthy businesses, healthy teams, healthy families are all about having that cohesion amongst the leadership team, and clarity through the organization.
Yeah, Chris, I want to add something. I love that you talked about celebrating mistakes, because I know that you have worked in organizations, and I always say we got 100 ways to punish people for things, and maybe 1 or 2 ways to celebrate and reward them. And we already know now we're out of balance. To me, that's unhealthy. When my kids used to make mistakes in practice, we would literally stop, and I'm like, all right, give her a round of applause, because she dared to try something new. And that's the only way that we grow. That's the only way new ideas come about in an organization. That's the only way that we innovate, is to have that, as you said, that ability to be open with our ideas and our thoughts without us going duck hunting, right? Like you throw an idea up and you shoot it down before it has a chance to even fly. We don't need to duck hunt our ideas. Yeah. So yeah, that's excellent. Thank you.
It's interesting, Coach Kathy, you say that, because at one of our prior Women in Business events, somebody actually made a comment that they allow themselves to make 3 mistakes a day. So I thought that was a great idea. Yeah. Our next question is for Coach Kathy. What are some tips to help you get unstuck, and how do you move past going to thinking?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I'm not sure that women, people in general, actually know what is happening to them when they are stuck or when they feel like they're in a rut. One of the things I talk a lot about is mindset, and there is no action that occurs without a thought preceding it, right? We don't often see that space, but there's no action that occurs without a thought that precedes it, even if that thought is unconscious, and we train ourselves how to think. So if that's the case, and we can agree on that, then when we're in a rut or we're feeling stuck, it's because we're thinking the same things over and over again, but we tend to believe that we're actually doing the same things over and over again. And I call a rut repetitive unconscious thinking. And you think of it in a way of like a bike trail. We create these neural pathways. And I think this is important for us to understand. We create these neural pathways in our brain. And what that means is that we think the same things over and over again. It creates like a bike trail. And if anybody's ever ridden on a bike trail where there's a groove, we know that when your wheels are on it, they automatically fall on that groove, right? That's what happens to our thinking. We automatically start thinking a certain way. So then we react or we behave or say the same things over and over again. What we have to do is get our tires out of that bike trail, that groove. And that's hard because then you're forcing yourself to be over here on the side. But that's what it's like to be very intentional and conscious of your thoughts so that you can actually make a different choice. Our brain loves autopilot. So the brain will try to put on autopilot as many things as possible, which is great for breathing, shoe tying, brushing your teeth, not so great for innovating, trying to break out of old habits and routines or old ways of doing things, even when we're in our organizations and how we lead. So, we have to be conscious about how we're thinking and stop and say, all right, how am I seeing this situation? Right? Is this really the same thing? Like, I'll give you an example. Anybody ever been in a relationship that's bad? You broke up with somebody, you get into another relationship, and all of a sudden you experience something that feels the same, but it's actually not the same. So you react the same. But if you could stop and say, okay, this is a brand new relationship. How can I show up differently in this moment in order to make a different choice as to how I'm going to behave or how I'm going to think about this or what I'm going to say in this situation? So once we can do that, the part when we transition to that I'm going to thinking is really about evaluating. Right? My dad used to always say, tomorrow never comes, right? It never comes. But I'll make a segue. We get overwhelmed and we are going to, because what we're trying to do seems so overwhelming. There's so many things that we want to do and as Chris said earlier, there's no clarity around that. So a lot of the things that we think we're going to do are actually projects that we haven't gotten clear on. What is it that you're actually trying to create? What's that vision for that end result, right? Then what are the steps that it takes to get to that end result? And how can I break those steps down so I know the first thing to do? Like some people who own businesses will say, I want to build a website. That will stay on their to-do list for weeks, months. Why? Because it's not a to-do, it's a project. But we always go for the low-hanging fruit because, again, that's easy. It's comfortable. I know exactly how to do it. So all those things that we really want to do to move forward, to grow, are going tos, because the juicy fruit's at the top of the tree. And we're just so used to getting that low-hanging fruit because it's easy and we're in our routines. We're in that rut in our routines. So we have to get clarity. We have to make sure that we know exactly what that result is. We have to be able to break down and prioritize the steps so that we can pick one small victory for us and then another small victory. And that creates momentum. If you just do these really small things consistently, that takes your life and your career in a completely different direction.
I completely agree with that, Coach Kathy. It makes it easier to pick one small task and focus on that, because sometimes you've got a million things going on around you. And if you can just focus on one and get through that and move to the next one, I think it helps you to progress more easily.
Yeah, I think Chris had something to add too.
Yeah. If I can, yeah. I mean, if I head out to the parking lot and find a DeLorean, I might take it back 15 years and see if I can hire Coach Kathy to coach me. I think, what you've said about that mindset and perspective, it's so important. And I think it's so important for leadership too, because it's hard to really have that perspective with which to challenge your own sort of thoughts and your own biases, right? I mean, I was a kid, I grew up, in the 80s in New York, blue collar parents, didn't go to college. And what else? Catholic school, all boys Catholic school is brutal. But all these things that I did, and nobody ever said like, hey, do you realize that you think like a boy who grew up in New York to blue collar parents, and you don't really get that many opportunities to be encouraged to think that way. And then you start to say, oh my gosh, I was believing this and I was doing this and I was thinking this just because I always had, and nobody ever told me otherwise, right? For the first 18 years of my career, I worked at, I won't name names, but kind of big professional services firms, right? The types of names that you see on the sides of big buildings when you're driving around places like Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. And I just thought that my job was to put my head down and kind of fight and battle and hustle to work my way to the top of those companies. Leaving and going and doing something on my own was something that never even crossed my mind. And then in the span of about 3 years, I lost 3 people who were very close to me. And my wife sort of said, hey, you're like miserable. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know. I'm to use Kathy's word, of stuck. Right. And she said, look, go try something different. And I kind of pitched this idea of starting my own company. And she was like, well, what's the worst that can happen? You quit your company. If it doesn't work out, a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, you can turn around with your resume, go right back to their company, or I'm sure one of your biggest competitors would love to have you. It's like, wow, you're probably right. Like the logic was wrong, but like if the outcome of what would happen if I tried and failed was true, then again, messing with the logic a little bit, it kind of seemed like I was already failing. So I said, well, why don't I just give this thing a shot? And just that shift in mindset, that shift in perspective just opened up a world that I didn't even know existed for me.
That's awesome.
That's great. You've got a very intelligent wife, Chris.
Yes, I do. I married way up.
So Chris, this question is for you. How do we know if our team or organization is healthy? And if so, how healthy are we?
So that's a great question. I would say it's a little bit different for each team and each organization, right? I mean, I would say that there should be kind of checkpoints, right? I think sometimes what we do, and Kathy, we do this in our sports teams, we do this in our families, where it's like we get so, I like your term, the rut, right? You get stuck in the rut. You just get stuck in the conduct of the business, right? Hey, we've got a game on Wednesday. We've got another game on Saturday. We're practicing. We're doing this. We do that in business. Hey, we've got these big goals that we've got for this quarter or for this fiscal year or whatever it is, that you never sort of stop and say, how are we doing, right? And I think a lot of leaders, again, because their bias is towards market share, towards profit, the idea of like pumping the brakes and just doing a check-in, they're like, we can't really afford to do that. Like why would we do that, right? Why would we give away a half a day's worth of profits? Or, why would we hurt our efficiency numbers by stopping and pausing like that? And so I think when organizations do take the time or find other ways to gain those insights, and they've adopted healthy practices like goal setting and understanding their purpose, then there should be natural feedback loops that tell them that, hey, we've gotten off the pace here a little bit, right? We talked about how, we do a great job, and I'm just kind of making up a story, right? So we talk about that we do a great job of onboarding people. We get them really excited to be part of the team. We get them really excited about our delivery or whatever our service platform is. But then for whatever reason, around the 6-month time, we kind of just let them go off on their own, and they kind of lose their mojo a little bit. And now we've got turnover numbers that are really not what we like, right? Or not. Someone said they stall. Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of companies kind of make this mistake. And I think when if you have those feedback loops built in, you can self-check on that stuff. You can pivot, you can make little adjustments, and it gets easy to fix it. So it's sort of the healthy companies, it's interesting, right? Because companies that are already healthy seem to be more likely clients for and more likely investors in more healthy type behaviors, right? They recognize that it works. They want to get better. The ones that really, really need to be healthy, it's hard to get them on board sometimes.
Yeah. You talk about feedback loops, Chris, and the feedback loop, it can happen at any level of the organization. I always talk about using performance reviews as coaching opportunities, and not just 1 year, hey, let's meet, or every 6 months, and then you go off by yourself. That feedback loop is like, okay, hey, let's get together in another 30 days and see how these things are going, so we can make a tweak and see if we're doing well. Is this working? If it's not, let's do something different. Do you need any more support from me? Is there a knowledge gap here or a skill gap here? And, if you're doing these little practices at every level of the organization, and even in a sense of, let's have a half day, we'll have a town hall and talk about where are we, right? We've received some feedback. Let's analyze that feedback and figure out where we are as an organization. That bottom line, that's what people think, is they think that all of these things are touchy-feely things that detract from the bottom line, and the work is the only thing that actually feeds the bottom line, when all the research out there has shown it's just the opposite, right? The number of hours that people work and the number that they're actually productive. So why don't we shorten the workday? Like, we can find a half day within that shortened work week, to do this. So, but it's counterintuitive to how we've been conditioned. And that's the thing. We're in this rut, right? And we've been conditioned to do things a certain way. And so that's what we do.
Yeah. It makes me think of, I know that not everybody will agree with this, but I think the idea of work-life balance is kind of a myth that was made up to kind of protect people who don't like their work. Right. And I recognize that it is a luxury to really enjoy your work. But I think if you're in a healthier situation, you can find pieces of it that make sense. Right. And when you're talking about being authentic, right, it's totally the opposite when people say, well, I have my work personality and I have my at-home personality. Mm-hmm. And I know that construct makes sense for people, but I still feel like the amount of stress that it must create to try to be two different people. And I was living that for a while. I mean, a lot of times I'll say I was my own case study, right? I felt like, I was at this big kind of, fancy, I'll use the term fancy, but I was at this firm that was very kind of like, anyway, fancy, right? Fancy. And I felt like I had to behave a certain way there. And I had to behave a certain way with the leaders and the partners and the senior most folks. Had to behave a certain way that was kind of consistent with that brand in front of my clients. And I felt like it was totally different than who I was, right? I personally, I may not come off here, but a little bit silly, a little bit goofy. Like, I like to smile. Like, I would feel like a great way to measure whether I was having an effect, an impact on my clients. And I was an expert in organizational performance management, so I could sit there and go metrics with anybody. But if I could make my clients smile 5 to 10 times a day, I know I'm doing a good job. Regardless of anything else, if there's smiles happening, I'm doing a good job. Even if it's a little messy, right? Even if there's some mistakes along the way. And so I think, again, to use your term from earlier, to be intentional, right? And when you're having those performance sessions, right, making them collaborative, right? I think you said, what could I do for you? Right? Helping each other, making that collaborative, and then picking the measures that just make sense. And they can be simple, right? They can be so simple. And I think when people sit down and do performance management, they're like, oh, it needs to be complicated and it needs to have 3 sub measures tied to it. Yeah. No, like,
and I need to do all the talking. Right. I'm
right.
Like, no, I should do very little talking. This is really about you.
Yes. Oh, I love it.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. This question is for both Coach Kathy and Chris. How can you contribute to the best people experiences in your workplace, both for yourself and your colleagues? Coach Kathy, you want to start with that?
Sure. And, I'm actually going to go back to my days coaching because I think that that has really shaped the kind of leader I've become. Now, I got to tell you, I came up through basketball through one of the ultimate leaders, which is Dean Smith, who coached the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So I played at Chapel Hill. So that is the environment I came up in. And he was a people person. So I don't have a graphic, but if you could see kind of like three circles, right? So circle here, and the circle up top. So there's three circles and they're kind of intertwined. One of the circles on the bottom is operations, one is people, and the top is strategy. If you were to ask leaders, where they spend the most time, right? They would say, oh, on people. And I would say, well, just because you're spending time with people doesn't mean you're spending time on people. Most of us spend our time operationally. So, it's important for us to be able to, how do I say, focus on the people and really understanding what's important to them and really connecting as a leader. There have to be moments in the day where I say, Chris, hey, how was your day? I know you went on vacation this weekend. How did things go? Or, I know that this is happening a lot. How was your daughter's game? We have to help the people in our organizations feel seen. And like, I'm more than just a tool in a toolbox who's here to, I'm not a hammer, just here to hammer a nail, but there's so much more to me that I bring to this experience. If we're not doing that, then the only control that our teams, that our employees have truly in an organization is their performance. And they will withhold their performance. And that's not to say that you'll see them not doing any work. It means that they're not doing as much as they could be doing if they were in an environment where they felt like they were truly seen and validated and supported as more than just a tool. And so I think we really have to create these environments and I did this with my kids was, I don't coach all my kids the same way. Some of them need more nurturing, right? And everybody says the golden rule, treat others the way that you want to be treated. I'm like, no, I like the other one, treat others the way that they want to be treated, right? Because not everybody wants to be treated the way that I'm treated. So I was talking to my mom about this. We're on my daughter's team. My daughter doesn't need a lot of nurturing, right? If you're tough on her, she's like, yeah, I'm good. But there's another girl on her team who doesn't respond to that. And she needs nurturing. And her mother called me and said, can you talk to her before the game? And I said, sure, but she's just a sweet kid. She's a high performer, but she needs something different. And if I don't know as a leader, this is why I like the DISC assessments. I like assessments that give you an opportunity to talk about the different styles in an organization without people feeling like they're talking about me personally, right? This is my normative style. It opens up the opportunity for conversation and to be valued as being different and being seen as being different. And then me saying, how do I adjust my leadership style to get the most out of you and to create this relationship where you feel like you are really connected to this team, this organization, and our mission and what we're trying to do here. So.
When I'll start with sort of a sports analogy, right? I mean, Kathy was a basketball player and a coach. I'm a soccer player and a coach. Like, in order to be really effective at those sports, right? And probably any other sport, you have to be able to kind of get into like what athletes might call a flow, right? If you're trying to watch me try to stumble through this using basketball terms, Kathy, right? If you're being guarded by somebody and you've got to try to pull up and hit a jump shot, right? If you're thinking about what is my coach going to say about this? What are my teammates thinking about me right now? What happens if I miss this shot? The likelihood that shot goes down is probably zero.
Yep.
Right. And, same application in any other sport, in soccer, right? Think about golf, where it's so kind of mental, right? That same application of flow happens in our work, right? We're having discussions with clients. We're having discussions with teammates. We're trying to figure out really complicated things that have impacts on people's lives and their finances and things like that. So from an organizational perspective, one of the things that there's a sort of a thought leader in the organizational health space named Patrick Lencioni. And
Love
what
him.
Lencioni took, he's great, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that Lencioni talks about is for the senior most leader to play a role that he calls the chief reminding officer, right? So the chief reminding officer, it's not the conventional CEO who's sort of running the show, right? It's a reflection of a process wherein you build your team with the right people, right? And again, looking back to the sports analogy, right? Maybe that's a couple of guards, right? A couple of forwards and a center, right? I don't know as much about basketball. I don't think they actually do those anymore, but they used to, right? And so, if it's soccer, you've got some defenders, you got a goalkeeper, you got somebody who can score, right? So you're putting the right people in the right places, gosh, and then you just step back, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to lead it at that point, right? And again, to use another sports analogy, if you've done your job in practice, in the games, you should just be able to sit back and watch your team perform.
Yes.
And just cheer them on, right? You got the best seat in the house. And so I think, bringing it kind of back into the office space, if that senior leader, if he or she can put the right people in the right positions and step back and trust them to do that, then the reminding comes in. Hey, here's what we're here to do. Hey, here's the way we behave. Here's why it's important that we try to get this stuff right. Here's what happens if we can, proceed and reach our goals. And, oh, if you have a question, sure, I'm happy to answer that. And hey, you know what? I know you're having a tough time right now. Don't worry about it. The team will cover us. Go and take a few days, come back, and you'll be awesome when you get back.
Yeah. Chris, like, here's why we're here. Here's why this is important. It reminds me a lot of Simon Sinek's work, Start With Why, which is what we forget. We become so, I don't want to say dictatorial, but this is do this, do that, do that. We need to do this, we need to do that. And then our teams, the people that we're leading, lose connection with the why and why this is important and how what I do is connected to the bigger picture. In sports, it's the same thing, right? They have to know why these things. And when my daughter was growing up, I didn't grow up with why. My mom, I grew up in an era was you do what I say do, right? And we're just like, okay. But my daughter was different. And so she didn't get a cell phone until she was 13, 14 years old. She couldn't have social media. And I would always say, I said, it's just no for now, not no forever. Let me explain why. So she could understand that there's, that this is connected to something bigger. This isn't just about, I do this, do that, do this. So we often don't create that connection to the vision, to the importance, to your importance, your individual importance, because we can get lost in organizations as individuals if we don't understand our importance.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we're talking, about leadership, and he happened to be a parent as well. And I said, look, the most important job that you're ever going to have is being a dad, right? And you think about what you do, right, to allow for what your children need to have the experiences that are going to shape them as an adult, right? You're not going to school and taking their tests to make sure they get it right. You're not doing their homework. You're not talking to people for them, right? Now, some of that stuff might happen, but we're talking about high school age kids.
Yeah.
I said, why would you manage people in your organization any different than that? Why would you drag them kicking and screaming towards some kind of corporate output that's going to give them a terrible experience and they're going to leave, right? Your business is going to suffer. You're going to lose intellectual capital. It's going to cost you money to find somebody else who can come up to speed and deliver whatever it is you're delivering. Like, why on earth would we do it differently than that?
Right.
And yeah, and we just sort of said, oh, okay, well.
Like, good point.
Right, right.
It looks like we might have one question in our chat. So it says, personal connections and water cooler discussions are so important. I feel that the new hybrid model makes it more difficult. And I find people are more burnt out than ever. Any tips you can share for healthy organizations? We'll start with you, Chris.
Sure. I think it puts the impetus on leadership now more than ever, right? I mean, you're not there to see it, right? It's a scenario. The virtual scenario requires even more trust, right? It requires even more. I'll use the word experimentation, right? It makes it more incumbent on the leader to understand the people in the organization, on the team, what they need, and trying to be responsive to it, right? Giving people grace, giving people space, recognizing that each thing they try may not work out exactly how it was the first time. I hear a lot of kind of horror stories about people saying, I don't know what's going on here, but we got to get people back in the office, right? Get them back 3 days a week, 4 days a week. I need to see them. I need to make sure that they're doing work, right? Well, you may see those people for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, but eventually they're going to leave.
Mhm.
And then you're going to be struggling to find somebody else. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a right answer or a formula, but I think it is about really leaning further forward than a lot of leaders have ever been asked to lean before, and understanding what their people need and finding out how that suits the way that they want to conduct business.
Yeah. I don't think we can replicate in office as a virtual experience. And we've been trying to do that, right? We are over Zooming meetings, right? You got meetings all day long. And because it was so easy to kind of get people together in the office, and as Patrick Lencioni, Death by Meeting, we probably shouldn't be having all these meetings anyway, and they're not done properly. However, I think that this is a great opportunity. I feel like every challenge presents an opportunity. And for leaders, this is a great opportunity to do some rethinking around, what am I prioritizing, and how do I now create an environment that my people still feel connected, they still feel valued, and they still feel trusted. And I do think that is maybe asking, how do we work best now? Right? You've got smart people on your team. I say this all the time, even with the players that I coach, like, you guys are smart. I don't need to tell you everything. And you're the ones in uniform out there doing the work. Tell me what works best. What are you most comfortable with at this moment? Right? So what works best for you? And then how do we maybe cut back on all these unnecessary meetings, read the book, right? So we understand exactly how to structure a good meeting, but then maybe we do a book club where we're all reading the same book, and we'll get together once a month and talk about this book, or use some of the principles in this book, right? And there has to be different ways, and there's so many opportunities now, but we're so stuck in a rut as to what work means and what it's supposed to look like, that we have a difficult time kind of rethinking how it's going to work for us this way, versus just trying to force it back to the way that it used to be. And we've been in a different space for so long. It's kind of like going, I can't fit in my baby clothes, right? I don't need baby food. I'm not playing with, baby toys, because I've outgrown that. We have grown because we've had this different experience through COVID. So trying to force us to be the people we were before this new experience, which has caused us to now be different. We value different things and want to spend our time different ways. So our work needs to reflect that. And we need to be working towards understanding, so how do we rethink this so that we can continue to be productive?
That's great. Thank you. I want to thank both of you, Coach Kathy and Chris, for this insightful discussion. I know we're coming to an end, so I will turn it to Kathy for some closing remarks.
Thank you both, Coach Kathy and Chris. I learned so much today. Just some of the takeaways, the rut. I love that, the repetitive unconscious thinking. Every time we do get stuck in ruts, and I think it's very important for us to think of that and find ways out of it. And linking that, Chris, to when you said, a healthy organization has the cohesiveness and the clarity to give people to get out of those ruts. Just so many great concepts that you all brought up, the chief reminding officer. I've never read Patrick Lencioni. Is that his name? You'll have to give us his, because we do like to send out after some links or books to people. I've never read him, but truly after your comments, want to read him and what he says. But both of you had such great insights on so many areas. And Coach Kathy, I loved it when you said when the person made a mistake that you stopped and you clapped for them, because you know it is trying to do something new. And I don't know who told me, but years ago someone told me there are no mistakes. Everything is a training experience, right?
I love
So
that.
we can look at it in a different way. But to do that, because when you are making mistakes, a lot of time it is because you're trying something new. You are trying to reach out. You're trying to get out of that rut. And I think it really does bring everything full circle here. So I want to thank you both so much for the conversation. I think it was really great. I know everybody who attended learned a lot. I know I did, and truly appreciate, the conversation that you had, and look forward to being able to continue the conversation further after the event. So also want to thank everybody for attending today. Hope you all learned as much as I did and enjoyed it as much as I did. I'll be looking forward to reaching out to both Coach Kathy and Chris again. And do want to remind everybody that we will be putting up some summaries about the event and posting it on social media. So please like us on social media. Keep in mind that Matthews, Carter and Boyce, every January, we do have what we call our economic outlook given by Dr. Terry Clower. We will be hosting that in January, and we look forward to having another Women in Business event sometime in the spring. So again, just really want to thank Coach Kathy and Chris for wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed it, really learned a lot, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody sometime soon. So thanks again.